Afternoon, everyone. Hope you're all having a great day, even with the restrictive lockdown measures that we currently face. I'm Paulo. I've been with Beyond Trust for about 3 years, and we've helped a lot of organizations address different needs when it comes to remote access and PAM solutions across multiple sectors. Today's session is going to walk through the history of remote access, help you understand how threat actors can exploit them, and some security considerations around remote access that you should be thinking about, especially with the current lockdown requirements around remote users. What we're hoping that we will learn from today's session is the basic history of traditional remote access, how the threat actors are exploiting the current access solutions, and techniques and tools that they currently use. And lastly, the security considerations that organizations should be taking into account while deploying remote access solutions and mitigating risk for the organization. Based on previous experience, I've just broadly defined the three major types of VPNs. The first being tunneling VPNs. Most of us have been exposed to these, and they're either a split tunnel or a dedicated connection to the network. Thereafter, we have externally published remote services and dedicated remote access tools, which is basically software that allows you to directly connect to systems or applications. So we will walk through these, help you understand some of the risks that they pose, and dive into possible attacks and how to mitigate those risks. VPNs are basically used to create encrypted tunnels to allow users to gain access to network infrastructure, with a socket connection from the client to the target resource. In the late 2000s, we saw a major increase in browser-based SSL VPNs. Some very common features of those VPNs were that they were running on network layers on this OSI model, and that's over layer 2 or layer 3. They have common properties which allows to connect remote hosts onto corporate networks. That would be either remote users or third parties. The connections are almost always IP-based for the applications, and the solutions tend to be deployed on the perimeter of the network. The VPNs do very little to enhance your privacy or your security, unless you start pairing them with other VPN security controls. The risk grows where the connection can be used for other IP connections, and it introduces other attack vectors to the network. The next section of VPNs are around the publishing of external-facing remote services. Using a tool like Shodan, you can get a view of the number of devices out in the wild running RDP services and see how this number has grown over the past year. Another common tactic we've seen from some IT departments is to put the RDP service on a non-standard port, commonly known as security by obscurity. And Shodan again can confirm that these have increased. Even though we know that with very simple tools, an attacker can identify the software listening on any specific port. But still, 8% of RDP devices remain vulnerable to Bluekeep, even though the patch has been available from Microsoft since last year, May. The last section of VPN tools are the free remote access tools. This basically relates to a client running on a service that allows a user to connect back to a resource. We find that with these tools, they address limited use cases and do not really meet all the requirements for the organization. These tools tend to be difficult to administer and control. By them being freely available, they also introduce various new attack vectors and pose significant risk to the organization. What we can do now is look at what is currently happening, in particular around the current COVID-19 requirements that we face. We find that many organizations are struggling to find the balance between productivity and security. Organizations have had to change their operating model to either 100% telecommuting or have a huge workforce working remotely. In reality, we find that most organizations do not have the infrastructure to meet their remote workforce requirements. This is putting additional strain on the network, applications, and the systems. When looking at traditional VPN solutions, Organizations have to consider if they have enough licenses, enough capacity on their current appliances, and enough human resources to manage the solutions in terms of onboarding users and applications. While the organization is trying to best resolve these issues, we've already seen the World Health Organization reporting an increase on coronavirus-related scams and phishing attacks. These threat actors are not letting up, and for them, this is just another opportunity to attack an organization. We have seen that due to the COVID-19 requirements, that organizations tend to create more risk. They are loosening their bring your own device policies. They are allowing individuals to conduct personal business on corporate laptops. I myself have had to commission an old laptop to allow my son to use Zoom sessions for school. These risks are real, and I think everybody is trying to cope as best as possible. Looking back at the free remote access tools, they tend to be outdated and they tend to pose additional risks. Organizations still need to make use of standard VPNs. Some of these are still always on tunnels for remote users when all they need is access to cloud-based applications, for example, Office 365. The risk of phishing emails, malicious and vulnerable applications is a very real risk to home users that are working from endpoints that could either be personal or that don't fully comply with the organization's security policies. If we consider how people need to work remotely, in general, this is divided into two main scenarios. The first being that there is a need for supporting of the end users. This would be your typical services team that needs to connect, update, install, and configure devices securely, whether that is a personal or business device. Our concern is the impact on security. How flexible and reliable will this be when the teams need to maintain a high level of service? The other side of this is the enablement portion. Being able to provide secure access to allow people to use their devices safely. Again, is it a personal or business device? And here we're thinking about the concerns of insecure passwords, making changes to the devices, files and data that reside on those devices, be it laptop or mobile devices. Is the security posture going to be intact, and will the organization be able to support the user? The way I like to deal with this is to think more like a hacker. So let's say we put on our black hat for a while. What really drives an attacker? There is the obvious financial gain, either by directly making money from the attack. An example would be them using ransomware to extract money from the organization, or by indirectly selling malware and ransomware services online. They could even look at selling access to the organization or destabilizing the organization. You have the ideological approach, where the attacker wants to harm the reputation or deny services to the customers. You can also think around political impact. Perhaps the adversary wants to know the organization's next moves or the secrets of the organization. An example of this is in 2014, Sony Pictures Entertainment was attacked by a North Korean organization. They wanted to advance their political agenda and in part to stop the release of the movie The Interview. The final driver would be around prestige and curiosity. Is the attacker doing this to just say that he can, to prove that he can? With COVID-19, you have many people sitting at home, for example, script kiddies, that are building their skills and learning new attacks. If you take these motivations into account, we can try and build a model to see how this works in the real world. You have to wonder what would make an attacker be successful. These attacks are run by fully functional enterprises, even if they are a criminal enterprise. They have to have low cost overheads so that they can maximize their profits. It has to be a repeatable and scalable solution so that they can target many different organizations. They need to have persistent access inside that organization so that they can discover the valuable information and also discover higher privileged accounts that will give them the keys to the kingdom. If we play this out with a very simple attack chain, there are basically three phases which include infiltration, persistence and exploitation, and the exfiltration of data. If we think about remote access technologies, we see it firstly at the infiltration phase, and we have to think about what are the best ones. What can we do? If we look at the external accessible devices, this could be a personal device, business device, perhaps a mobile device, or even a third-party or externally published application as we discussed earlier. Other wins for the attacker would be single-factor authentication, social engineering, and this could be around phishing campaigns or breach credentials from remote user devices. This all adds up to allow a breach to occur. In the real world, free access tools are commonly used for social engineering attacks. Something we often see is fake technical support scams, which could seem like it's a consumer issue, but in reality it affects the entire organization. You see a lot of ATP groups using remote tools to gain the initial access to an organization. A recent example is ATP41, a suspected Chinese group dating back to 2012 that used remote access tools to steal credentials and gain access to organizations. FireEye reported that in March of this year, ATP41 used a central management tool to gain access and move around the organization. Fortunately, this was patched rather quickly once a vulnerability was discovered. With regards to persistence and exploitation, the attacker now has a foothold in the organization. The easy wins for the attacker would be to get some kind of credential and move from the user system to a privileged system. The attacker is able to use lateral movement thereafter if the network has a flat segment with limited segmentation. Once the attacker gains access to the privileged system, he can deploy his command and control toolset and be able to gain full control of the organization. A primary example of this are help desk users. Not only do they have access to privileged accounts, but with huge staff rotations, they introduce a lot of accounts and systems that can be exploited by the attacker. A good real-world example would be APT34. These guys use existing tools like PuTTY and RDP to move as an administrator within the organization. They use tunneling tools to be able to maintain access to their command and control toolset, and were able to exfiltrate data from the organization without being detected. So for exfiltration, command and control is obviously needed. Another win would be a system that is not monitored for using alternative protocols. Unmonitored or irregular DNS packets leaving the organization could be leaking data. Once that data leaves, you are basically providing the attacker with the so-called motivation that he needs. So as the blue team, we need to change the stakes so that an attacker cannot penetrate or survive within the organization, giving our organization the best chance it has of not being compromised. So thinking back, we need to establish context for remote access. We still have two needs, and those are getting support to provide high-level services to the end users, irrespective of the devices that they are working on, and the enablement portion to allow users to connect and complete their tasks. So as an organization, we understand the context and need to make the compromise and disruption difficult. We see these two areas as being poorly managed, and then the attackers gain the benefit. We know we have a growing list of privileged credentials, be it on Windows, Linux, or cloud-based systems, amongst others. Lots of organizations work with third-party vendors and outsource services. This puts a lot of trust with those third parties that their systems and their tools are secure. If we look back at the Target breach, they had a vendor that led to the compromise of their payment system. If we are using traditional VPN solutions, we're basically tunneling past all our defenses and allowing access to our networks. You need to make sure that you have done due diligence on your third parties so that we understand and have visibility over access and privilege and know what is normal access and privilege within an organization. When you think of how we can practically apply this, we like to think of the just-in-time approach. It is an inventory management approach where rather than having a warehouse full of stock, the components needed would arrive at the assembly stage at the time when required. This introduces a lot of efficiencies and cost savings for an organization. The same concept can be applied to the access space. With the just-in-time concept, the idea is to dynamically assign access to only the people that you want so that they can perform their duties and have the correct access. It takes the organization away from the always-on accounts and makes sure that the access is only available for the time needed. Considering that a typical privilege account has access for 160 hours in a week with an always-on account, if that account only runs a batch script once a week, you can easily reduce your attack surface to only a few minutes for that specific privilege account. Adopting just-in-time as part of your privilege management approach means you can implement a true least privilege model enterprise-wide. If you start putting these controls in place, you have a good baseline to understand which credentials and access is being used within your organization. As an organization, you need to provide for remote access solutions, especially with the current COVID-19 requirements. And this can be done because you understand your access and you can easily detect malicious or shadow IT activity. By taking a risk-based approach, you want to target the most risky connections. And these mostly tend to be vendor and third-party connections. As a summary and a takeaway, overall we need to reduce impact. We need to enforce policies with the correct access for the time required. We need to enable accountability for individual accounts and understand who is using shared accounts. By having definitions in the policies, we can define which systems can be accessed and are able to whitelist or blacklist applications if required, thereby applying the principle of least privilege. Removing operational burden of installing and configuring VPNs or access, we can also further reduce the impact. And finally, by being able to control and monitor sessions, we can give you a live visibility of all your current sessions. If we look back at the attack chain, and if you think of all the security controls, we want to limit an attacker, be it external or an internal threat. We want to stop lateral movement, privilege escalations, and the misuse of protocols like RDP and SSH, besides others. Having that control, we can stop the attack at this point within the attack chain. For exfiltration, you can introduce file integrity monitoring as part of your remote access strategy, especially around sensitive information and files. In closing, if remote access and being able to provide solutions for your remote workforce is one of your current pain points, please feel free to contact the local Beyond Trust team. Thank you.